Born into a show business family, actress and singer-songwriter Zooey Deschanel hit the spotlight in the 2003 Christmas classic, Elf. Since then, Zooey's versatile career has skyrocketed. She's released 4 acclaimed albums with indie duo She and Him, and stars in the hit Fox sitcom New Girl. Zooey lives and works in Los Angeles, California.
I was born in Santa Monica, California, and I grew up here. I am really close with my parents and my sister, so family is very important. My mother always said we came from a long line of strong women, and I would consider myself a feminist, not even a reluctant feminist, a gung-ho feminist. I started this website called Hello Giggles, and it's basically a positive online community for young women. It's not your mother's feminist website. My father's mother, Granny, whose real name is Anne Orr Deschanel, just passed away, and she was a real spitfire. She was very into human rights, and she was very devoted to ending slavery worldwide. She comes from a Quaker family. The Quakers are activists, and they're very liberal. So my granny was really political. I mean, she got arrested for chaining herself to a fence outside a nuclear power plant when she was 80. I can see myself in her strong will. I can relate to her on those levels and getting up in arms about things. So I want to find out who her ancestors were. I'm curious about it all because I want to know where I came from, and all of this contributes to who we are. Granny came from a long line of abolitionists, and in her later years, she definitely told a story about someone spearheading the abolitionist movement before the Civil War. So I don't know exactly what the connection is there. And now that Granny has passed on, I'd really love to find more out.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So happy to see you.
So I'm going to start my journey by seeing my parents, and I'm hoping they can tell me a little bit more about my granny's side of the family.
So I was wondering if you guys could tell me a little bit more about Granny's family.
Well, my mother's side of the family were mostly Quakers.
Right.
My grandfather, Adrian Van Bracklin Orr, grew up in a little town outside of Philadelphia. And this is a picture of the family.
Yeah, I've seen this picture before, but I didn't know who was who. So can you tell me?
Okay, well,
That's Adrian,
that's
right?
my grandfather.
Granny's father.
Yes. And that's my great-grandfather, Joseph.
And then your great-grandmother, what was her name?
Martha Elizabeth, right? Martha Elizabeth
Yeah.
Pownall.
Okay.
Now that I know my great-grandfather was Adrian Orr, and my great-great-grandparents were Joseph Orr and Martha Pownall, I'm hoping maybe my dad can tell me more about our ancestors' connection to the anti-slavery movement.
I mean, the Quakers actually were the first religion to come out against slavery.
It's pretty amazing because they believed in gender equality, too. It's racial, gender, religious freedom.
The Quakers are pretty much against war of any form, and, you know, have always been pacifists. Yeah, so there were stories about the Pownall family being involved with, you know, the abolitionists and that sort of thing, but I really don't know the details.
Okay, so where do you think I should go to find out more about the Pownall family?
Well, I think the Philadelphia Public Library would be great. There are a lot of records there because Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers.
Great. I guess I'm going to Philadelphia then.
I guess so.
Well, thank you guys.
All right.
Yeah.
It was really fun to sit down with my parents because they've always been interested in family history. It's not often you get the opportunity to research your roots and be in the place that your ancestors were, and I think that's a really incredible opportunity, and so I am excited. So I am going to Philadelphia to find out more about that side. I have arranged to meet with Quaker historian Max Carter at the Free Library of Philadelphia. Max has already started researching the Pownall line in Pennsylvania, and I'm hoping he can give me some direction in my search for abolitionist ancestors.
So we did considerable research in the Quaker minutes and the records of Friends meetings. So we put together this family tree.
This is so cool. Okay. So I see myself and my sister. This is my mother, my father. And then Granny Annie. Here's Joseph Moffat and Martha Elizabeth Pownall. I saw a picture of her and her family. George Pownall, his parents were Levi Pownall and Sarah Henderson, my 4 times great-grandmother. Sarah Henderson sounds very familiar to me. I know I've heard this name before. And then I see her parents, Eleanor Brenton and Thomas Henderson. So everyone was Quaker.
Lots of Quaker names there.
I wonder if there's any way we can find out more about Sarah Henderson and her family.
That would require looking through the male line. We can look up the census records.
Yes, going to ancestry.com.
Right, ancestry.com.
So I'm looking at Thomas Henderson.
Right. To see if we can find out anything. In the 1800 census, he lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Okay, we're at the Pennsylvania Septennial Census.
Right, the Septennial Census was a census taken by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to provide records for taxation and representation.
There it is, Thomas Henderson.
Thomas Henderson.
List of the slaves owned by persons residing within the county of Lancaster. I don't like this. Thomas Henderson had 1 slave.
Zooey Deschanel was in Philadelphia, looking for relatives who were involved in the anti-slavery movement. But instead, she's just discovered a 5 times great-grandfather who owned a slave.
My grandmother, whose family this is, she fought worldwide slavery, so it's very surprising to find out that there was a person in this particular line that had a slave.
Well, it's interesting. We found that we didn't have Thomas Henderson in the Quaker records. So that indicates he was not a Quaker.
That's very interesting. So why did she marry this dude? Because the Quakers are so anti-slavery, and for Eleanor Brenton to marry a man who had a slave, obviously he wasn't Quaker.
Right. Well, Quakers emphasized marriage for love. It was one of the few religious professions that gave women equal rights with men. In the wider society, women didn't have much voice. So Eleanor Brenton, your 5 times great-grandmother, could speak up. They made their own decisions. And this was uncommon for women in the 1700s to have a voice, to have authority.
Very interesting.
And so she would have been raised strong. She would have been willing to follow her own heart.
Right.
And who knows what the household might have been like with a strong Quaker woman marrying a non-Quaker, raising another Quaker woman.
Yeah. I'm thinking Sarah Henderson must have taken after her mother since she was Quaker, and she married a Quaker, Levi Pownall. So I'm wondering what side of the issue she fell on.
For that, we'll have to do further research. Swarthmore College, which has one of the best repositories of Quaker records in North America, is just down the road.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much.
I'm really curious about Sarah Henderson because I had heard that name before from Granny. And then the fact that Eleanor, my 5 times great-grandmother, married Thomas, I was really surprised because she's a Quaker and anti-slavery, and he had a slave. And so I really, really want to find out what kind of person Sarah Henderson was as an adult, because as a Quaker, I would think she would have an opinion about slavery. I'm assuming she had done something interesting for my grandmother to have mentioned her. So I'm heading to the Friends Historical Library in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania to meet with historian Stacy Robertson. Since I know Sarah got married, I asked Stacy to look into records on Sarah Henderson or Sarah Pownall. Stacy has asked curator Chris Densmore to pull everything he could find relating to Sarah.
We're gonna start with this. This is the Salisbury Monthly Quaker Meeting Women's Minutes.
From 1845 to 1882. I'm wondering who she is at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so Salisbury Monthly Meeting, 5th day of 1st month of 1848. So what age would Sarah have been?
Well, actually, we know that Eleanor was married in 1791.
Okay. So if this is 1848, Sarah couldn't have been older than 57.
Right.
A joint committee of men and women friends, and friends means Quakers,
Exactly.
were appointed to confer, encouraging the members of our society to be faithful against the sin of slavery. To which service the following friends were appointed: Sarah Pownall. That's wonderful. So she has been appointed to a committee that is rallying to inspire a more impassioned approach to ending slavery.
That's exactly what she's doing.
For a person to be an abolitionist in this time, was that a common thing?
Not at all. In fact, for Sarah to participate in this committee meant that she was willing to be an outspoken opponent of slavery in a time when being an outspoken opponent of slavery was very dangerous.
Really?
Yes. As you know, 1848 is about 13 years before the beginning of the Civil War.
Right.
The North had already freed slaves,
Right.
by this time. But that didn't mean that Northerners, by and large, were abolitionists. They really weren't. So it condemned these people as fanatics and zealots.
Wow.
Abolitionists who spoke out in mainstream Northern society were often mobbed. They were kicked out of their own churches. It was a very, very brave and courageous thing for her to do.
It's really inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, what would Sarah and the other members of this committee have done to help fight slavery?
We have one more document for you to look at. It is related to this committee.
Okay. Oh, Salisbury Monthly Meeting, 1848. Okay, so this is a little sort of pamphlet. Dear friends, we feel constrained to invite you to join us in the inquiry against slavery, seeing that the evil has been steadily increasing. Our moral vision has been measurably obscured. We have been content to live upon the labors of others, forgetting that it is the sweat of our face that we are to eat bread. So meaning we need to do work ourselves. We shouldn't have slaves do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. And whether we are not striking hands with the oppressor when we lend our support to a government that sanctions and perpetuates his wrongs. So basically they're saying that they don't want to support a government that is turning a blind eye to people who are using slave labor and owning slaves.
It's a real condemnation of a government that accepts slavery.
That's a really strong statement. Wow.
Zooey Deschanel is in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, looking into the past of her 4 times great-grandmother, Sarah Pownall. She's just learned that Sarah was on a committee rallying support for the abolitionist movement.
Slavery was an incredibly powerful institution, so what they're talking about is really serious.
The fact that these people stood up and said, this is not okay, we have been desensitized to how terrible this thing is. It's incredible and horrible to think that it was accepted amongst so many people.
And it was.
I mean, and the bravery of these people is pretty amazing.
Yes.
Sorry, it's really...
I know.
This letter is so beautiful. Okay. We believe a responsibility, therefore, rests on us to enter into an individual examination how far we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we see the anguish of his soul and will not hear him. And that's saying we can't let these people be enslaved. They're our brothers.
Exactly.
Okay. And then it is signed, Sarah Pownall. There's my relative, one of 12 people on this letter.
Exactly.
It's so exciting.
I think it's 6 men and 6 women, so another testimony to their commitment to equality.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What an impassioned letter.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's truly moving. I feel honored to be related to one of these people.
They were very brave.
Supporting my mother's theory that I come from a long line of strong women, but it's an even longer line than
Absolutely. This is one
realized.
strong woman.
Yesterday, all I had was a family tree, but now I have an identity for this woman. I can't wait to find out more. She's so exciting and interesting.
She is. Well, we're actually going to send you to the Lancaster Historical Society.
Oh, great.
Right, which is the location where Sarah lived in Lancaster County. And this is a location that is really kind of a hotbed of abolitionism.
Okay. Thank you so much for showing this to me.
Oh, you are so welcome.
It's so exciting.
It was really interesting today to look at some of the records from the anti-slavery committee that my ancestor, Sarah, was a part of, because to have been a woman and stand up for what she believed in at that time, it's really moving. It does make me feel closer to my granny because she was a person that devoted herself in a way that I think was really admirable. I like seeing that spirit come up generation after generation. Sarah was very passionate, and so I'm just curious to see what other things she did to fight against slavery. And I'm hoping to see a picture of Sarah. So I'm heading to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where Stacy recommended I meet with Dr. Nikki Taylor. I'm hoping she can tell me more about Sarah Pownall's work in the anti-slavery movement.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Nikki Taylor. Have a seat.
So I know that my 4 times great-grandmother, Sarah Pownall, was a part of an anti-slavery committee here in Lancaster County. And I wanted to find out more about the work that they did. And I was wondering why Lancaster County had so much abolitionist activity.
There are 2 reasons why this community was so strongly committed to abolitionism. The first is the high population of Quakers here.
Yes.
And then the second is the county's proximity to the Mason-Dixon line, which, as you know, was the dividing line between the slave state of Maryland and the free state of Pennsylvania. And let me show you a document that the Lancaster County History Community has put together that documents some key historical events in the abolitionist movement.
Okay, great.
So this map has Lancaster County and the Mason-Dixon line.
I could only imagine that there might have been some underground railroad sort of activity around here. Okay, so Sadsbury Township, that's where my 4 times great-grandmother, Sarah Pownall, was from. Parker House and Pownall Farm. Is that
Yes.
my Pownall?
Yes.
Oh.
Zooey Deschanel is in Lancaster, where she has just discovered that a house on her 4 times great-grandparents' farm was an important site on the Underground Railroad. Now she wants to find out if her ancestors were involved.
Oh my gosh, okay. The Parker House at Pownall Farm, demolished in the late 19th century. This was a great loss to America's historic and cultural landscape. It was located a short distance to the southeast on the farm of Levi and Sarah Pownall, Quaker farmers. So this was on my family's farm.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
The Parker House was the home of William Parker and his wife. And William Parker was a man who had been born into slavery in Maryland. He escaped and ended up in Lancaster County, where he settled. He rented land from Sarah and Levi Pownall for years.
Oh, wow.
But the most important thing about Parker is that he was a conductor and a station master on the Underground Railroad.
Oh.
Highly illegal, the Underground Railroad was a vast network of people who helped slaves escape to free states or Canada. Station masters hid runaways in their homes, while conductors guided them from one station to the next. Hundreds of brave abolitionists, both black and white, risked prison or worse to help roughly 100,000 slaves to freedom.
on their land. It was there that he hid a lot of fugitive slaves. And
oh, how wonderful.
Yeah.
So he played a huge part in the Underground Railroad.
Yes, he did. So this brings us to the question of how much did they know about what he was doing?
I can only imagine that they must have known and approved of this Underground Railroad station. So I'd like to read a few things on this map, because I'm looking at it and it has the Cristiana riot marker. This Pennsylvania State Historical Marker describes the tenant home of William and Eliza Parker, site of the Cristiana riot. What does that mean?
Right now, we call it the Cristiana resistance, but back then it was denounced as a riot. What it was an event in which free blacks from Lancaster County had a standoff with slave owners from Maryland. It was one of the most important events in American history leading to the Civil War, in fact.
Really?
Yes. I've actually arranged for you to have a private tour at the Pownall farm.
Really?
For you to learn more about the Cristiana resistance.
Wow, that's so exciting. Thank you so much.
I'm really curious to find out what happened on my 4 times great-grandparents' farm. I mean, even just to have been there for this major historical event must have been incredible. I don't know how violent or how dramatic this resistance was, so I am a little bit nervous because I really admire Sarah. I do feel protective of her. So I'm really curious to go to the farm and hear what happened there. I can only imagine she must have been involved. I'm headed to the Pownall family farm to meet historian Fergus Bordewick to find out more information about the Cristiana resistance.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
Here we are. This is where William Parker's house stood, right out in the middle of this plowed field.
Wow.
In fact, Sarah's house was right over there, about a quarter of a mile away. As you know, this was the center of the Underground Railroad in this area. And William Parker was himself a fugitive slave.
Right.
And Parker also headed essentially an Underground Railroad militia made up of African Americans who were determined to fight rather than to allow anybody to be carried back into slavery.
It seems that the state of affairs with slavery had gotten worse.
Well, the Fugitive Slave Law was one of the nastiest, cruelest pieces of legislation ever passed by the United States Congress.
The Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 required the federal government to assist slave owners and bounty hunters in capturing fugitive slaves in northern free states and returning them to slavery. Because accused runaways weren't represented in court, even free men were dragged away and sold without any chance to defend themselves. This contentious law also required citizens like Sarah to turn in fugitive slaves and threaten to imprison anyone who refused. Suddenly, no African Americans were guaranteed freedom, and the Underground Railroad became more important than ever.
So basically, the federal government was saying it was illegal not to return slaves that had run away.
That's precisely what
That's
the law
shocking.
was. The Fugitive Slave Law basically turbocharged the abolitionist movement. The Underground Railroad was the radical edge of abolitionism. They were the people who were willing to put their lives on the line, breaking the law in order to help fugitives.
So, what was the Cristiana resistance?
It happened September 11th, 1851. There was a slave owner named Edward Gorsuch. Several of his slaves had run away from Maryland.
Okay.
Edward Gorsuch learned that 2 of those fugitives were here in Lancaster County, and Gorsuch came up here seeking those fugitive slaves, and he traced them to William Parker's house.
Right on my family's farm.
Yes, in fact, Sarah could see and probably hear everything happening here out her window.
Oh my gosh. So I'm wondering if you have any information about her involvement.
I do. This is an excerpt from one of the best and earliest accounts of the Underground Railroad, written just after the Civil War.
For some days before this conflict, reports afloat that an attack was soon to be made on Parker's house. Sarah Pownall had a conversation with him the night before the riot and urged him, if slaveholders should come, not to lead the colored people to resist the fugitive slave law by force of arms, but to escape to Canada. He replied, the laws for personal protection are not made for us, and we are not bound to obey them. If a fight occurs, I want the whites to keep away. They have a country and may obey the laws, but we have no country. Wow.
Quite a statement, isn't it?
Yeah, it is quite a statement.
He's making it clear that he and his group are going to fight.
And Sarah and Levi Pownall were Quakers, so they did not believe in violence. So after this conversation, what did William Parker do? Did he listen to Sarah, or did he stay and try to fight a battle?
He armed himself. On the morning of September 11th, Edward Gorsuch and the posse that he'd collected in Philadelphia, now that included members of his own family, his son Dickinson Gorsuch, and a number of police, they came up the road, you see across the valley here. They surrounded the house, they're armed. Parker and his men and his very brave wife, Eliza, are in the house, they're all armed. When it becomes pretty clear that there's going to be a confrontation, Eliza, who herself is an escaped slave, takes a horn and trumpets across the valley. Maybe as many as 60 people, mostly African Americans, drop their work implements and they come running here to the house, and including...
So it was basically a battle.
It was a battle.
Oh my God.
Zooey Deschanel is in Cristiana, Pennsylvania, where she just learned that violence over slavery erupted on her family's farm. Slave owner Edward Gorsuch knew 2 of his escaped slaves had taken refuge in William Parker's house. With an armed posse, Gorsuch surrounded the house and demanded his slaves surrender.
I mean, I can't imagine being Sarah and Levi Pownall looking out their window and seeing basically a battle on their land.
I think it must have hurt them as people of deep Quaker conviction to see violence about to happen on their property right in front of them and to be powerless to stop it.
Right. So tell me what happened when the battle started.
The 2 groups collided outside the house. Shots were fired on both sides. Edward Gorsuch was killed. His son Dickinson was almost killed, shot, beaten to the ground. There was a melee. The police ran.
Oh, my goodness.
Most people were frightened of black people, and they were frightened of black people with weapons in their hands, beating, shooting white people, even though
they were defending themselves.
Even though they were defending themselves. The fugitives were not captured. They were saved and they were protected.
That's amazing. So what was the aftermath of the Cristiana resistance?
Everybody knew about this.
Right.
Newspapers all across the United States reported on what happened here. President Fillmore is following it. The president's chief advisor told him there has to be a reaction. The government has to act.
Okay.
This led to a reign of terror in Lancaster County. It was said at the time that Negroes were hunted like partridges across Lancaster County. Their homes were invaded, people were dragged out, arrested, interrogated, beaten. White abolitionists were also dragged in by the authorities. People didn't know what was going to happen to them.
So to be an abolitionist at this time must have been dangerous. Wow. You know, you always think Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but there were so many people that assisted.
People like William Parker, his wife Eliza Parker, emancipated themselves.
Right.
They didn't wait for Abraham Lincoln, and they did it with the assistance of people like Sarah Pownall.
Okay, so the Cristiana resistance happened here. My ancestors are right over there on that farm. What did they do?
That is a good question, and there's a lot to say about it. Let's go over to Moore's Memorial Library in Cristiana, and I think you're going to see things that will interest you.
Okay, great.
Let's go.
It's shocking to think that this sort of violent turning point in the road leading up to the Civil War happened on my ancestors' property. It seems to speak about a government that was incredibly flawed So I'm really proud that my ancestors were involved at this time in the abolitionist movement. I don't know what I'm expecting to see. I think I know who Sarah Pownall is. I think I know how she would react to this. I think she would help William Parker and his family. And I'm just hoping to see some evidence of this.
I've asked the library to pull some documents for us.
I can't wait. Some Recollections of a Long and Unsuccessful Life by George Steele.
He had a sense of humor. Let's go to page 10.
Okay.
Let's start there.
I'm interested to see what this is. When the fighting was over at the riot house, Parker and Levi Pownall Jr. ran to get a horse and wagon, but before they geared up, a neighbor brought the wounded man over. At night the day of the riot, Dickinson Gorsuch, the wounded man, was not expected to live. There were a great many of his friends and neighbors in the Pownall house, and the house was surrounded by a crowd. Interesting. So they actually took in
Dickinson Gorsuch, the son of Edward Gorsuch.
I'm so surprised. Well, I guess they were sort of kindly Quaker folk, and if there was a injured man, they would take him in. Elizabeth Pownall, who afterwards became my wife. So this is written by the son-in-law of Sarah Pownall.
Exactly.
Okay. And her sister Ellen were washing dishes in the kitchen when Parker and Pinckney walked in through the out kitchen door. Can you just remind me who Pinckney is?
He was William Parker's brother-in-law.
Right. So they're in hot water and they have to flee. Okay. Fortunately, the girls had presence of mind enough to blow out the candles and open the stair door and motion to the two men to go upstairs. So they concealed them.
Yes.
Wow, this is amazing. Then Mrs. Sarah Pownall, who was the best and most capable woman I ever knew, whispered to the girls, "Get a clean pillowcase and fill it with bread and meat." There was a whispered remonstrance. All these people in the house to feed and barely enough bread for breakfast. Mrs. Pownall whispered back, "Mix more bread." The pillowcase was filled. Levi Pownall Jr. went upstairs and provided the men with clothes and hats, so he gave them disguises. George Pownall took the pillowcase of food out to the orchard and left it at the foot of the queen apple tree. So that's my 3 times great-grandfather. So he was passing food to them, and his brother, Levi Pownall Jr., was disguising them. At a favorable time, the 2 colored men were brought down, and the 2 Miss Pownalls walked beside them to the gate. If the guards saw them, they supposed them to be callers on the young ladies. They had the enemy in their house, and they were able to disguise Parker and Pinckney as gentlemen callers.
Yes.
One morning when the Pownall family came down, they found a letter under the front door addressed to Elizabeth B. Pownall. It said, "Parker is safe in Canada." So that's pretty extraordinary.
It was an incredibly heroic operation. Clearly, it was very complex. It was undertaken while the entire community was under hostile occupation.
That would seem to me that they have done this before.
No question about it. This is proof that your ancestor, Sarah Pownall, and her entire family were deep, deep, deep in the Underground Railroad.
Wow. It's so encouraging to think that at this time, a woman could have been doing something this brave and this cutting edge and this political. It's really exciting to think that this is my family.
Indeed.
So it sounds like Cristiana was in real turmoil at this point, and I'm wondering what happened in the aftermath and where the Pownalls were in all of this.
The Pownalls are not arrested, remarkably, considering that we know they were harboring the 2 most wanted men in Lancaster County.
Right.
38 of their neighbors, black and white, are arrested, put on trial for treason, for making war against the United States, for daring to fight back.
Wow.
they see those neighbors, at least one of them, going to trial for treason. Now, it took the jury only 15 minutes to acquit that man because the evidence didn't back it up. Government was so humiliated by that defeat that it abandoned charges against the remaining people. And the result was a collapse, really, of federal prosecutions. Now, there's a man who is so affected by what's happened here that it helps embitter him against the United States government. He's a friend of the Gorsuch family. His name is John Wilkes Booth.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Zooey Deschanel has just learned that the United States government failed to convict abolitionists of treason after a historic event on her 4 times great-grandparents' farm, which angered a notorious man, John Wilkes Booth.
And Booth writes how deeply he was angered by the crime committed against the Gorsuch family and how it was never paid for. And this is one of the things John Wilkes Booth is carrying with him in 1865.
Was anger about the Cristiana resistance.
Yeah, and assassinates Abraham Lincoln.
That's incredible.
Open this.
Oh my goodness.
There she is.
That's Sarah Pownall. Wow. She has a very kind face.
Yes.
This is wonderful to see. This means so much more to me, knowing what she did in her life and what kind of a person she was. I feel I have a real respect for this great woman. In fact, I think, to me, she's a hero. And I just admire her intelligence and her bravery.
They believed in a higher law that required them to do the right thing rather than something that happened to be legal but was morally wrong.
Yeah. Because this is so much greater than just a family. This is a huge movement and led to the free country we live in now.
She made a direct contribution to that here at Cristiana.
Well, that's really amazing. So I knew, because I had read it in my family tree, that Sarah Pownall had passed away in September of '52.
She died within that year of the resistance.
Do we know how she died?
I don't think we do.
Perhaps the stress of the resistance really weighed on Sarah.
I've brought you a map of the Salisbury Cemetery.
So she's buried not far from here.
A few minutes' drive.
I think I'm gonna go pay my respects.
I've become so attached to this person over the past few days, and to see her face and put a face with the name and the story and all of the things that she did really completed the picture. I was really sad to learn that Sarah Pownall died right after the Cristiana resistance, because she died before the Civil War and before emancipation. To not have been able to see that in her lifetime is sort of sad. So visiting Sarah Pownall's grave, I think, will be a really sweet ending to this journey.
I can see some of the qualities that I see in Sarah Pownall, you know, in my grandmother and Granny. And to see how far back it goes is really exciting. To truly understand how extraordinary it was for a woman at this time to be involved politically like Sarah Pownall was is just incredible. And it makes me realize how much we can change. It makes me really inspired to encourage the next generation of strong women.